Welcome to the Stewardship Leader Podcast, brought to you by the Christian Stewardship Network. CSN exists to teach and equip church leaders the biblical perspective on finances so they can speak with authority, confidence, and integrity. To learn more, visit us at christianstewardshipnetwork.com. Well, hey everybody, welcome to Stewardship Leader. I'm your host, Leo Sabo, and today I have the pleasure of having Courtney Markley back with us. She was with us a few months ago. It's too long, but we've had Courtney back with us. Courtney is a financial counselor and also the founder of the Center for Financial Discipleship. And she recently was at our annual forum in Fort Lauderdale and did a specific session on improving your financial coaching ministry. And it was really well received. And I wanted to allow Courtney really to come on and share this with our broader audience, and that's you folks, and just let her teach you a little bit about how you can actually take your coaching ministry to a different level. This is a ministry that's needed in the church. It's not an easy one. Courtney and I have been doing this for a while. She's been doing it professionally for a lot longer. And I think this is something that she really has a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight that I think really helps those that are in the stewardship and coaching ministry really understand how to do this well. And so I have been tapping her for any kind of knowledge and insight that we can to learn from her and learn from her experience and wisdom as she's gained it over these years. So Courtney, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Leo. I'm excited to be here.
Very good. Well, I'm excited that you'll be sharing. I did not have a chance to sit in that session. I think I was teaching one at the same time you were.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of in a way for me to be able to learn what you taught in that session. Let's go ahead and just begin with a good place to start is stewardship leaders experience these unique challenges when running a financial coaching ministry. I've done it for many years. Sometimes the success factor is not what you hope for, and you put so much time into it, so much effort. You have volunteers that you're training, and it
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't seem to go as well as we want. And this ministry is not for everybody in the church, but for those who this is needed for, uh, we need to do it well because we have this chance to really help people in an area where just education and discipleship doesn't seem to work as well. So we do have to walk with them. It is a longer journey, a lot more intense, a lot more involved. So this is where it becomes a little bit difficult to have success because so much depends on it. So anything we can gain from you would be helpful to help us to do this better. So what are some of the common challenges coaches face, counselors face in churches as they're trying to do this ministry?
Yeah, it's interesting as we start to lean in with more stewardship pastors and church leaders who are running a financial coaching ministry. I hear very similar commonalities and pain points when they're talking about their coaching ministry. It's things like, just like you mentioned, we put in so much time and effort to train our volunteers, to promote financial coaching, to get people to come. But a lot of our participants, they struggle with follow through. We struggle with having a lot of no shows or people quitting after one or two sessions, or maybe people don't seem motivated to do the work. And so it's interesting when I talk to these stewardship pastors, their problem usually isn't getting volunteers bought in. A lot of folks have amazing volunteers who have a heart to do this one-on-one work, but the pain points actually lie within the participants. How do we get the participants more engaged? How do we make sure that we're serving them well? And how do we actually get participants in the door? It's very multifaceted. There's a lot of different potential pain points that a church might have. But what I have heard, at least from my experience, is that it revolves more around the participant than the getting volunteer coaches, which from the outside looking in, you would think it might be reversed. But normally what I hear, it's the participants themselves. So I have experienced this on both sides. I started out as a volunteer coach at my church, and that was the first time I ever got trained up to meet with people one-on-one. And then God made it really clear that He was leading me to start this and do it professionally. So I've gotten to see it on both sides. And I have experienced these same pain points from both sides, both within the ministry and within my work. So I know how it feels to like pour your heart into something and then have people just not show up that day, or they ghost you after one or two sessions. And you're like, man, what am I doing wrong? And I started my financial coaching practice many years ago, and I was probably 3 or 4 months in, and I was just spinning my wheels. And I was like, how do I get people as excited to do this work as I'm excited? I know what the transformations can be like. So it took a moment for me to self evaluate, to kind of step back. And I'm looking at all of these different people that I've been trying really hard to serve, but for one reason or another, it just wasn't quite working. And I had to take a step back and realize that I was the common denominator in all of these different situations. So it was, I think we're tempted to sometimes be like, well, it's all their fault. They're just not getting it, or they're just not motivated, or it's not the right time for them. And sometimes that's true. But if we're seeing a consistent pattern of participants not following through, not showing up, not engaging, we have to very humbly then look in the mirror and say, what are we doing to allow these outcomes to continue to happen over and over and over again? So, because I was doing this for a business and not just a ministry, and I say that, kind of carefully because it's absolutely ministry work, no matter, what you're doing, like we're doing it for the Lord. But I had like a kind of like a pressure, a timeline on me. I was pregnant with my second kid. I was still working full time. And I was like, I have to figure this out if I'm going to be able to make the leap to do this full time. Because I started my business, I was still working part time. So I was like, I have to figure this out. There's things that I'm clearly doing wrong that I could be shifting. And the cool thing was, Leo, a lot of these things that I discovered that helped me were very small shifts. It's not like I was doing all of these massive things, like massive overhauls. I was doing all of these things wrong. I was able to narrow down on like four key things that I was doing incorrectly, and just small shifts that made huge changes. And now, when I look back years ago and I'm thinking of all these no shows, of all these, clients that weren't fully bought in, now that rarely happens. I can't tell you the last time I had a no show. I can't tell you the last time I worked with someone and I'm like, man, they're just not giving it their all. It's like every time I show up, my clients do work. They're excited to be there. I'm excited to be there. And it just, we get to see God really doing these amazing things. So thank you. I'm excited to lean in here more.
Yeah, that's definitely a unique position that I would say most financial coaches out there are not experiencing.
Yeah.
And like you, I looked at because I was running a pretty large coaching ministry early on. When I got into ministry, I was hired for that purpose to build a team. And as I was building that team and seeing the fairly significant and fairly steady failures, both in my own coaching, but also in the coaching of the people that were doing it with me, um, we would get together once a month. Part of it was to continue to tweak and train and help them to figure out what they could do better. But also at the same time was to celebrate some of the wins. And there weren't a lot of them, unfortunately. And
Mm,
it was really sad because these were such bought in, such like passionate volunteers. And yet we were not seeing the success. And after 3.5 years of doing that, I just felt like, man, I just can't keep these people like pumped up and ready to go and then seeing that. So, but like you, I didn't look at this and say, well, it's just the people. It's not us. We're doing everything we can. We're showing up. We're ready. We're available. We're willing. And that was all true. But yet I still felt like there was something we could do better. Because here's what I believe. I believe if a person steps out and makes a call to say, I need help, there's a willingness there. There's a humility that it takes to do that.
mhm.
And so if people take that step, it's not because they're saying, "Well, I'm gonna sign up, but I'm not gonna show up." Well, no, nobody does that.
Right.
Eventually it'll drop off for a reason, and that's what I'd like to get to. So I'm excited to just figure out and to have you share what are some of the suggestions that you have to mitigate these challenges that we're facing in this ministry.
Yeah, I'm excited to lean in here. And I want to just offer a disclaimer real quick because we are attempting to cover a wide range of gaps that may or may not exist in your ministry. Each church body is so different. We all may be working towards a similar goals and maybe experiencing similar problems, but the way we go about it can look vastly different. So, as you're listening, audience, just I want to encourage you just to take what serves you, take what serves your church, and then leave out what doesn't. But my aim is just to help spark some creativity and help you identify where one or two of those gaps are so that we can start to eliminate those no shows. We can create engaged participants, and also that will create more engaged volunteers. So I'm excited to lean in.
All right. Well, I know that in the breakout that you did at the forum, you outlined 4 self assessed questions stewardship leaders can ask themselves to improve their communication. So let's go over these. What is the first one?
Yes. Great. Thank you, Leo. The first question to ask yourself is: do people have a clear understanding of what financial coaching is and what your ministry is offering? Now, I know that sounds very elementary, but I was often shocked. So my test for this is always my husband. I like to hear him tell other people what I do. And if he does it with he hates it. He always knows I'm like listening really intently to his answer. But I want to listen in. He hears me talk about my work, obviously, more than anyone else. I feel sorry for him. But if he is describing what I do to people and it is wildly off base from how I would describe it, that tells me that I am not messaging myself well. That means that I have missed a mark. And so, what I would encourage church leaders to do is take a random survey, go up to 5, 10 people on Sunday and say, hey, do you know about our financial coaching ministry? Like, what do you think it is that we do? How would you define it to someone else? Just ask a few questions to get a read on: does your congregation know what your ministry is doing, what problems you're helping people solve? And what I have witnessed from a lot of financial coaches, both within the ministry aspect and also within private businesses, is that we actually give off two different competing messages. So our message and our processes don't always match, and then that causes confusion. So, what I hear a lot of times is financial coaching is described as being like all about identifying our behaviors that are hindering your financial success and then helping you move past them. So, we get a lot of marketing language and we're communicating language that emphasizes more of the emotional and psychological pieces of the problem. But as people lean in, as they start to step in, and like you said, Leo, in a vulnerable moment, they raise their hand and say, yeah, I need help with this. Then they get a totally different message. And we say, okay, great. Financial coaching focuses on budgets, processes, and financial advice. And it's emphasizing totally the practical side of money, which you need all three. You need the emotional, psychological, you need the spiritual, and the practical pieces of money. But if someone was initially interested because they heard you leaning into the emotions, right? To the more of the heart of money. And you hit them first with, great, here's a budget. Those two things compete. Your messaging and your processes don't match. And so that's when we can see a potential breakdown where participants think they're getting one thing, but instead they're getting a totally different service than what they initially thought. And so they start to potentially back away. They're like, oh, if you would have just come out and said, hey, do you want help with your budget? They might have said, no, I'm not ready for that yet. Or like, no, that's like the last thing that I want to talk about. So we need to be really careful to say, does our messaging, do our processes match, so that we are inviting people into a conversation where they have an idea of what to expect and they understand what problems you're trying to solve.
Hmm. That makes sense. I mean, I don't think anyone that's reaching out is saying, I don't want you to tell me anything about my finances. Obviously, it's financial coaching or counseling.
Right.
But I could see how if you lead with, we're going to help you accomplish these practical tasks. I think in some ways, because this is something I experienced quite a bit, is people would come in and that first meeting usually went well because we focused on their needs, we focused on their emotions, we focused on those challenges. And then we gave them homework, which got very practical. and
Mm-hmm.
and it was that part that they struggle with. I used to think of it this way. People come in and they say, they may not say it directly this way, but what I think they're trying to say is, I've tried everything and I don't know how to do it. And I know how to do math. I'm not stupid. I know how to budget. I just, I don't know why I'm not doing it. Except they don't have the language to say it that way. So they're coming in saying something like, I'm broken. I need help. Can you fix me?
That's right.
And then we just take them back to, okay, we're going to help you track your expenses,
Mm-hmm.
put a budget together. And they're like, I've done that. Even though they've not done it well, they still feel like they checked that box. So I do see how not having the right message, or having that message literally differ from the way we draw them into the actual process we're taking them through, that could create a, oh, this is not what I thought it was. And more than likely, they might feel that, but they never tell us, do they? They just stop coming.
Hmm.
So that's really, really good. That's very insightful. All right, let's go to the second one.
Very good. The next question is, are you unintentionally creating any barriers for potential participants by eliciting negative money emotions in the onboarding process? So you kind of you gave me a great lead in, Leo, by what you just asked. For example, to give some handles around this, a lot of ministries will ask potential participants to send in their budgets or list of debts, etc., prior to ever meeting with a coach. So essentially, you're going from an intake form on a website, or you email the stewardship pastor saying, Raise your hand. Hey, I need some help." And a lot of times we'll get a great, okay, send us this information and then we will help you. That seems obvious enough, right? You're like, why doesn't that make sense, right? A plus B equals C. But we have to remember that many people carry a huge amount of guilt, shame, just negative emotions where money is concerned. And so by making this a requirement, you could actually be killing the relationship before it begins. So instead, what I encourage people to do, I think intake forms are important. It helps to gather some information about who you're talking with and how you could serve them. But instead of asking for those budgets, debts, those things right out of the gate, maybe instead ask a potential participant, what are the things that they're struggling with? And just like you outlined a moment ago for us, Leo, like what have they already tried and why do they think maybe those things didn't work for them? I would love for financial coaches as they're sitting down with a new person to have a better understanding of all the different financial advice that exists, right? I can read a book, I can watch a YouTube video, I can get free resources online. Why are they coming to you? Right? They could have done all of these things for free, alone in a room where they didn't have to expose their whole financial world to another person. So why are they coming to you? I would love the intake form to rather revolve around those types of questions versus just give me your budget, list of debts so that I can figure out how to quote unquote like solve your problem, right? Because people aren't math problems to be solved. I like to pose this to people because it's a very, very simple, easy fix, right? We're just talking about slightly adjusting your intake form that could have a dramatic impact on getting participants to sign up for coaching.
Yeah, that's good. So, just as a follow up question, because I know people that are doing this or in the ministry serving this way are probably going to want to ask the same questions. So I'll ask it for them.
Yeah.
When do you introduce the practical side? How far in? When do you actually say, all right, let's look at some of the numbers so that we can actually make some practical traction? Because obviously that has to be addressed at some point. But when do you do that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I feel like I give every stewardship pastor a mini heart attack when I give them my answer. So I will preface this with this is this is how we do it. This is how we have found success. It doesn't mean you have to copy exactly what we do. And again, we are structured a little bit differently where we are paid coaches who are going to walk with our clients for a long period of time. So the majority of our clients will initially agree to a 9-month coaching program with us. Our average person, though, ends up doubling that. We usually walk with people minimum of 18 months. So, with that being said, we normally don't get to the practical in and outs for at least 3 months. So, at least 6 sessions. Again, that's how we do it. We have a lot more room to play. But what Center for Financial Discipleship, where we've kind of just like found our niche and what we're really good at, is helping the people in really sticky spots. So if your marriage is hanging on by a thread, if you've had some serious trauma, if you've gone through some really, really painful experiences with money, those are the folks that we love to step in and serve. And for them, usually taking them to the budget right away is actually going to be very triggering for them. It's going to actually highlight the exact problems that they came to us to help them solve. So we walk very slowly. So usually about month 3, now every client is different. Some people come to us and the house is on fire and they don't have 3 months to wait to talk about a budget. And so we transition, right? We adjust. There have been some clients, especially like within marriages where there is such volatility around money, we do not talk about a budget for 6 months because I'm pretty sure like divorce would be thrown out there if we like leaned in too quickly too soon. So we adjust our process depending on what that person needs. But a good question that I like to pose to financial coaches and people running financial coaching ministries is essentially the framework that I give them is figure out what problem you're trying to solve within your financial coaching ministry. What is the main problem you're trying to solve? How much time do you need to walk with someone to solve that problem? What are the emotions around that problem? What are some of the things that they need to help get over that are kind of stepping in as hurdles? How can we address those things first and then introduce the practical? So it goes back to again, like what problem are you solving and what's the messaging? So if you're a financial coaching ministry and you're saying, listen, we just really love to work one on one with people and give them some creative solutions for their budget. And we're going to do like 3 sessions on deep dive budgeting. That's great. Then set up your process that way, set up the language that way so that people know what to expect. Now, if you're saying we want to be the go to if the person has tried literally everything else and they don't know what it is, that tells you that there's some deeper heart issues going on because the math is pretty simple. If you can understand basic math, you can budget, right? But it's the emotions around it that people need help with. So just go through that simple framework. What problem are we trying to solve? How long do we think we need to walk with that person to help them truly get some ground, make some headway on that? And then when is the best time to implement the practical?
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that we recognized when we had our coaching ministry, it was that not everybody had to go through coaching, obviously. And we typically set up the relationship. We knew the relationship was going to be probably 6 months to 12 months. And we were open to that, obviously. But we also realized that when we had 20, 30 people a month contacting our team to meet with somebody, that if we had 6 month or more relationships, it was gonna we're gonna have a backlog of people. We ended up having always a waiting list, which you think, well, that's a good problem to have. No, not really, because again, if people are humble enough to say, I need help, but it takes them a month and a half to connect with someone, by the time you contact them back, they're like, yeah, I'm over that. I don't need help. The point of pain is gone, whatever it is that caused them to actually make that call. So, one of the things that we tried to do is to create first, second, and third steps before coaching was offered. So, doing some Bible study type of teaching, right? A class or two on the emotions of money or the spiritual side of money. So, teaching biblical principles. Because for some people, that's really, they just need to understand what is God's purpose for my finances and how do I connect it to my faith in God. I'm always struggling. What is it that I don't know that I'm doing wrong, or what is it that I should be doing different? And we found that when we did some practical like workshops on how to budget, or this could be like a weekend seminar or 1 day seminar, or it could be a multi-week workshop or something, that many people would benefit from that. But out of that would trickle down 2 or 3 or 4 that would be like, okay, I went through it, didn't help me. And those are the people that we would try then to take through the financial coaching process. Because if you have a large church, especially, this could be a real challenge. But I definitely see the benefit of, like you said at the beginning, is that if you have very clear communication between your messaging and your process, people know what to expect. And that's starting on the right foundation. All right, well, that's great. All right, so we got through first and second one. Let's go to the third.
All right. So the third assessment question is, are you creating buy in from the participant? This was probably the most crucial one for me personally as I was working to resolve some of the issues we mentioned earlier. Because essentially, I was simply just trying to convince people to work with me, and it was a hey, trust me, you're gonna love it. Like this is gonna be great for you. I promise. Just trust me. And there was no real buy-in. I almost felt like I was begging them, like, please let me help you. Like, I just want to help you. And they weren't bought into the process at all. I see this happening in a lot of churches and with a lot of different financial coaches. And what I typically see happening is again, people will fill out an intake form. They might submit a few papers back, but they go essentially straight from the intake form to the first session. And what is happening here is you may be asking them to commit to something that they probably don't fully understand. And that's even if your messaging and your processes are clear and they match, it's still hard for many people to understand what a coaching relationship looks like until they experience it.
Conversations about money can be challenging, but generous giving creates safe spaces to explore God's perspective on generosity without asking for donations. Their gatherings have revitalized purpose and deepened relationships with God. Host a generosity retreat by visiting generousgiving.org/church.
And I like to use the example of like skydiving. So, Leo, you could sit me down and you could explain skydiving to me, all the ins and outs. We could watch a few training videos, all of the things. And then if you say, so Courtney, what do you think? Do you want to go skydiving with me for the next 6 Saturdays? First of all, it'd be a hard no. But if I was even open to that, I would probably say, I don't know. I need to try it once and experience it. And then I'll decide if I want to keep going. And so, for that reason, I suggest adding what I call in my world, I call it a consultation to your process. You can also call it something like a discovery session. I highly suggest a discovery session. It essentially would look like informal kind of interview between the potential participant and the coach. And this is before any commitments have been made by either party. Okay, so the coach hasn't agreed to coach them yet, and the participant hasn't agreed to coaching. So we're coming to the table and just helping them decide, are they ready for coaching? Leo, you mentioned kind of like the funnel earlier. Like, is there a different step that they could try first before moving on to one-on-one coaching? Or maybe financial coaching is not the right first step for them. Like I mentioned earlier, like marital problems. For a lot of people, if that's where they're coming from, they may need to meet with your marriage ministry first, or send them to a licensed marriage counselor first, and then come back and let's talk about money. Because you don't want to just throw fuel onto a fire if you're not sure if it's going to be helpful. So I like adding the discovery session to your process for 3 reasons. One, it creates that participant buy-in, and I can explain that in just a moment. Number 2, it gives the coach a sense of agency. So this really helps the coach also set the tone for the relationship, and it allows them to help determine like who they want to potentially work with and who they don't. Even thinking through volunteer coaches, you want the coach to be bought in. You want the coach to be excited to work with people. And so if they are seeing red flags out of the gate that make them say, I'm not sure this person's ready, or I think they need a different ministry first, this provides them an opportunity to do that. Otherwise, we get the really awkward conversation of the participant has already signed up for coaching. This is their first session, and the coach is looking at them going, I don't think you're supposed to be here. That is really awkward. So let's just stop that from happening, right? We can be proactive about it. So it creates a participant buy-in, it gives the coach a sense of agency, and then it sets the expectations for the coaching relationship, which is really important. So just adding this step into your process can dramatically reduce no-shows. So I want to just take a moment, if you don't mind, Leo, and just dive in a little bit more into what a discovery session can look like. So creating buy-in, essentially what I encourage coaches to do is to show value by serving. So we don't want to invite someone into a discovery session and then simply talk about coaching. And again, it could just sound like you're going to love it. Like we're going to help you do X, Y, Z. It's going to be so great. So do you want to do it? Again, that can be really hard when you're like, I don't know. Like financial coaching is, it's interesting because I feel like we almost have to educate people on what it is before they can even decide if they want to do it. So during the discovery session, I ask for potential participants, I'm like, hey, is it okay if I treat you like any of my other clients today? And I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to serve you really well. And at the end, we can determine if this is like the next right step for you. You want to create that buy in. You want them walking away saying, oh, wow, like I was served so well in that hour. I can't believe we talked about XYZ. That felt so good. I'm actually excited to start this process now. Like that's what you want them walking away from that hour with, because they might show up with some hesitancies, right? They might show up a little skeptical. Maybe one spouse is bought in and the other one was dragged to the table. This is a great time to serve that person really, really well. So during the consultation, you're serving them powerfully. What does that look like? Well, it means a couple things. You're getting underneath their pain points, because we know that money is rarely the root cause of the problem. So just help them, give them language, like you were sharing earlier, Leo. Give them some language around their money problems to help them understand what might actually be going on deeper. Address the emotions, get very, very curious, ask a lot of questions. And you can even be direct and ask them about their hesitancies about coaching, right? What would make you potentially not move forward in this process? Or what are some of the barriers that you potentially see or the hurdles that you're going to have to cross? Start having open dialogue around that. Ask them good questions to show that you care. So you can say, what do you envision our coaching relationship to look like? What characteristics are important to you in a coach? And by doing all of these things, you're building trust, right? Trust is really, really important in these conversations. You know that. So we want to give the participant feeling like they have agency, they have some say in the conversation and in the relationship too. And we want to build trust so that they do feel comfortable to be vulnerable later on and open up more as the coaching process continues. And then the discovery session also gives the coach agency to decide if the potential participant is a good fit. So, again, this is a space where the coach may discover some deeper underlying issues, and then they can suggest a different ministry first, just like the marriage counseling we mentioned earlier. This is also a great time for the coach to potentially test the person's willingness to be coached. And so, what that looks like is every now and then I'll do a consultation and I'm on the fence if the person will make a good client or not. And I'm not sure. So usually it's obvious like yes or no, but every now and then I'm like, oh, it's pretty gray. I'm not 100% sure. So I'll give them an assignment and I'll say, hey, listen, I think this could be good for you. Let's test something out first. Go do XYZ. And then as soon as you do it, come back and we'll talk about it. And then that, again, it creates that buy-in from the participant. If they really want help, they will go do the thing and then they will come back and you can talk about it. And then the coach is excited, the participant is excited, and you have a much higher likelihood that that participant is going to stay engaged throughout the entire time. And then, one last thing for the discovery session, if the participant and the coach both agree that they want to move forward, then this discovery meeting is the perfect place to set expectations. And this is where we want to counsel up our coaches to be firm, kind, but firm, and set the bar high. I think the problem with many of our coaching ministries is we set the bar super, super low. And then we get frustrated when people have a very low bar in working with us. And I'm like, again, we are the common denominator there. So go back and check within your ministry. Do you have a set list of expectations that you give to both the participants and the coaches? And what does that look like? Do you have a cancellation policy that you give to your participants? Look at things like that to create some healthy boundaries. And then the final thing, so I know I'm talking a ton, Leo, forgive me. But in the discovery session, so the coach has served them powerfully. They've asked really good questions. They've started to dig to the root of the problems. They set some expectations for what the relationship could look like. Then they might try to create a literal buy-in, which I know is a whole nother conversation that we could have for another day. I'm a big advocate for when you pay attention. Now, I know this gets really sticky in the ministry space. We don't necessarily want to be like physically charging people for ministry work within the church, right? Because that can be super sticky. And I haven't seen a church do this yet. But what we could do to create a literal buy-in situation, the coach can ask something to the effect of, what might you need to give up for our time together to be a success? You're not specifically asking them to give money to the church, right? They might not even give you a financial answer. They might say, I need to, commit to spending 15 minutes a day talking with my spouse about this, or I need to give up, this subscription, or, there's a whole list of things that you could potentially hear. I ask this question. I'm not necessarily affiliated with one church, but I often hear the response of, the Holy Spirit has been asking me to start giving to church, and I haven't been doing that. I think this is the first step. So it's just opening the door for people to start to think about what might I need to give up in order for my financial coaching experience to be a success. And again, you're creating some literal buy-in from that person and just getting them thinking a bit more. All right, Leo, I threw a million things out there. Forgive me. Forgive me for that monologue. But tell me what stands out to you.
Well, first of all, thank you. That extra actually is quite helpful because it's good to have those higher level, and I think it made a lot of sense. But digging into actually talking about that first session and how to set up that relationship for success is so crucial. That's where you either win or lose, right? When it comes to this relationship. And if you don't start it off the right way, if you don't go through the things you mentioned, then it's easy to think that things are going in the right way, but there's so much unknown. There's so many things they've not been asked and they've not responded and they've not shared. And you're right. I mean, the one thing that stuck out, not because the last thing you said, but it was the one thing that I think I could have done better myself when I was doing this, all the time in ministry, and that is to really get them to buy in. I just assumed that if they were there, if they went through the process already of calling, filling out the form, the whole thing we had set up, that the fact that they were there meant that they wanted to be there. But yet, again, there's so many things that I've learned that have helped me today. But the one thing that probably sticks out, there's several, but the one that sticks out the most is the client buy-in, right? The participant buy-in. So I think that's probably the thing that stood out the most. But I will go back to the first thing you mentioned, which is the messaging and the process. If that isn't communicating properly, then we're not even starting off the right foot. I mean, people are not going to literally make it past the first meeting. So a lot of good stuff in there, Courtney. I could probably go on and on, but thank you. That was fantastic. I really appreciate everything you dug into, especially the detail that you got there. It was not too long, not for me anyway. Hopefully, not for our audience as well.
Okay, good. Good. I'm so glad. Again, I like to dig in a little bit there because not I haven't come across too many financial coaching ministries who have that discovery session. And again, this is a fairly easy thing to implement and add into your current process. You're not going to have to overhaul a ton of things, but just this one step can make a huge, huge difference. And so I found in my own work, this particular area has been a huge game changer for me. And just getting people bought into the process so that we can really start off there showing up really well right out of the gate.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see the benefit of that. And I found myself after I stopped doing coaching full time, I still took on some clients. Every once in a while, I'll do one. I haven't done one in a while just because of my inability time wise. The last one I did, these people were recommended by a friend, and I had mentioned to the friend, I said, "Hey, I'm just too busy to take on a case." But then when I prayed about it, and I said, "Okay," I said, "I'll go ahead and meet with them, but I'm not signing up anything yet. I'm not agreeing to it until I meet with them and find out where they're at." And really, that's what it turned out to be. It was just a discovery session where I was able to ask them and find out where they were to see if they were really willing.
Hmm.
And to be honest, I mean, I did not feel 100% that they were, but I was willing to take the next step to see if they were. And we met for a few times, and I feel like it benefited them. And they were not a couple that really were starting at like at zero. They were already doing a lot of good things. So I felt like I just came along and kind of tweaked some things and helped them see things a little bit differently. They really didn't need the budget or the practical help. It was more of relationally, and he was a business guy doing consulting himself. So the income was very sporadic. But that's the thing that I recognize is that if I had done that early on and had a discovery session, I would have avoided a lot of relationships and a lot of coaching opportunities that really weren't going to succeed. And I didn't see that until literally years later, until I was kind of forced into that to say, well, I don't need to do this. I don't have to do this. Let me see if they're willing, and then we can go from there. So I think taking that position is an important one, even if you are in ministry. I know that there is this unspoken kind of rule, like if people come to you and you're a pastor or a ministry leader in the church, you can't say no. You have to say yes. That's not true. Jesus said no to a lot of people. It's not our heart to say no, but sometimes that you're not going to be able to help them where they're at, that something needs to change on their side before any kind of progress can be made.
That's right. And sometimes I think that's the best way that we can serve people. It's not just simply, giving them a stiff arm and saying, "Hey, we can't help you," but it's an opportunity for them to, uh, again, just I think the word of the day is agency, for them to gain some perspective and some agency over their situation, and recognizing, you're not going to promise them something that you don't think is possible, right? And I think that's where we can fall into that trap sometimes. We're like, we can help anyone come to us, and we can help you. It's like, no, 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 not everyone is prepared to receive that help. So sometimes saying no is the most loving, most helpful thing that we can do for someone, because it could potentially help prepare them to be able to receive help. And if no one shows them that, then they may never recognize it. And it's also a good lead in for the final assessment question that I have for folks. So, the very last thing, because again, we're trying to diagnose a whole slew of different potential problems and gaps that exist within coaching ministries. Obviously, there's a ton of great things that go on in coaching ministries too. So, I feel bad saying that out loud, because I'm like, oh, there's so many good things too. But there could be potentially a lot of gaps. So you could have someone who is absolutely bought in, and even if your processing and messaging isn't exactly right, and you send them the budget and all this stuff, they are so bought in. They are so, like, they are just at that point where they're like, I really need help. So I'm going to do whatever it is that you tell me to do. And they get to that first session, they maybe stick it out once or twice, and then you never hear from them again. And you're like, what happened? Where was the breakdown? There could be a lot of different things. But what I have observed to be a commonality among some coaches is essentially giving advice before we have earned the right to give advice. So the assessment question is, are you training your coaches to earn the right to give advice? And let me break this down a little bit. Studies have shown that people are actually more comfortable talking about their intimacy lives than their financial lives. So, when we're inviting people into a conversation, we have to recognize we might be looking at numbers and spreadsheets, but this is actually a conversation that feels very vulnerable and exposing for people. So, we have to train our coaches to earn the right to give advice, because if they don't, we could actually unintentionally be doing more harm than good. So, let me give you a couple examples real quick. So, I feel a little funny saying this to you one-on-one, Leo, because when I initially planned this, it was to a large group, so I could kind of not make eye contact with anyone. But I'm going to press in anyways. So just imagine for a moment that you are going to a marriage counselor. So you and your wife, might be experiencing just some tensions. I've been married long enough to know that, hey, I just think regularly we should go get a tune-up every now and then, right? There's no shame in that game. But let's say you raise your hand and say, yeah, let's meet with a marriage counselor. And this is the first time you're meeting with this person. And the first thing you do, you and your wife, you sit down and they say, well, tell me all of your bedroom problems so I can tell you what you're doing wrong. Like, holy smokes, you probably would run out of that room, right? Like, you would not come back, right? I wouldn't. And I would almost be a little bit offended. Like, whoa, you have not earned the right to ask me that question, right? That's super vulnerable. But when coaches sit down with people, and essentially they might not verbalize it like this, but the message we get is, show me your budget so I can tell you all the things you're doing wrong. That is incredibly exposing and vulnerable for people. And I may not come back. I might not be able to recover from that moment, right? Just like recovering from that moment with the marriage counselor. So they may not come back. And when I was still volunteering as a coach for a previous church, there was a time where I had already had my own business coaching practice up and running, and then I was also volunteering for our church. And our stewardship pastor calls me, and he's like, "All right, Courtney, I got a good one for you." And he pretty much at that point he sent me the tricky cases, because he knew that's what I enjoyed doing. But he's like, "Listen, this couple, they have ghosted so many other coaches. They will follow up with one session and then you never hear from them again." He's like, "You're kind of my last shot. Like, just meet with them and see what happens." So I'm like, okay, great. So I'm already kind of in my head, like, all right, maybe this will be the only time I get to talk to these people. Let's use this hour really well. And they were delightful, and they were so, so sweet. And you could tell that they were just hungry for help. And so just point blank during that discovery session, asked, listen, I know your history with financial coaches. I know that it has not worked out in the past. tell me why this time is different. What happened before? What's going to make this time, change? And essentially they said the last financial coach that they worked with, they met with him one time, that he didn't know anything about them. He looked at their budget, didn't say anything except start shopping at Aldi. That was it. He literally, she did that motion where he's like sliding the piece of paper across the desk, like just start shopping at Aldi. And she was like, he had no idea the amount of health issues our family has. He has no idea how much time, effort, energy, money we have invested to overcome these different barriers in our health. And our grocery budget is the only non-negotiable number on that page. So, what the coach was looking at, and what I haven't shared with you, this particular couple, they had over $300,000 of student loan debt and a combined income of about $2,500 a month. And that grocery budget was taking up about a quarter of their income. So you just look at the numbers and you're like, goodness, yeah, like we need to cut somewhere. But that grocery budget was off limits. And the coach had not earned the right to say that to them. He actually highly offended them and essentially dishonored all of this work that the family had done to overcome a lot of health issues that they were facing. So we have to train our coaches to earn the right to say things to people. Okay, they have to earn the right to give advice. Now, I was once coaching a coach who was really frustrated by his lack of results. He was doing this both as a ministry and as a side business, and he wasn't getting any clients or participants to engage with him. And he was super frustrated. And one of the just generic questions he had for me was like, how long should his coaching sessions be? And he had initially structured them as 30-minute sessions. And when I asked him why, he responded, well, because people don't want to hear me talk for more than 30 minutes. And this immediately, like, that's a red flag, folks, okay? Like, your sessions should be almost exclusively listening. I encourage people, you talk 10% of the time, you listen for 90%. That's a pretty hard, fast rule. And a quick story I'll share on just this piece to show how powerful listening is. I once heard a true story from a coach who was, this was on a big call with a lot of coaches, and she was just, helping us learn how to be better coaches. And she shared this story. This was many, many years ago before Zoom, and she was having a client meeting over the phone. So just the phone, not video or anything. And the coach didn't realize she went the entire hour muted. So the client hadn't heard a word that she said the entire time. So she didn't notice it till the very end. She's super embarrassed. So she's like, I'm not even going to say anything. So she unmutes and just thanks the client for her time and then ends the call. A few minutes later, the client texts her and she says, thank you so much. That was our best session yet. The coach literally hadn't said a word the entire time. So listening is really, really important. And coaching is far more about listening than giving advice. And just remember, any advice that we give must be earned. So as from the ministry leader perspective, I want to just ask you guys, what does it look like to fully understand the participant? Are you helping your coaches to understand how long does that take? And how will the coach know when it's the appropriate time to insert advice?
That's convicting in many ways, because I think most of us who get into this ministry have a desire to teach and to share what we know.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned from coaching is what you just shared at the beginning. Like you, I share all of the wisdom that I had as far as the biblical, the practical. And what I was consistently seeing is people that just seem to be frustrated and then not follow through. And then as I started training others, I realized by watching others doing it, how much they talked. And then I realized, well, I do the same thing. So that helped me to see what I need to stop doing, which is talking and asking questions. And then I started training them how to do the same. But there's so many things that that we don't know early on in the process. And it's like you said, if we haven't earned the right, we have no idea. We're literally walking a minefield.
Yeah.
And anything in that budget could be a bomb going off.
Exactly.
And all of us have stepped on them. So I totally understand it. It makes so much sense that we need to earn that right. And coaching, like you said, it's not a teaching opportunity. That's something I learned when I started coaching others. I'm like, okay, this is it's not a teaching opportunity. And that's why we created the classes ahead of time to say, hey, if you need teaching, you go to the class. If you need coaching, it's a totally different thing.
That's right.
This is where we're going to ask you questions to have you process so that you can get to discover what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and how to help that behavior and that process of change happen so that you can have different results, because it's not a knowledge problem.
That's right.
It's never about what I don't know. I mean, yes, there are some things that they don't know, but they won't discover them by just giving them more rules and more budgets and more spreadsheets or whatever. They'll discover them by having someone lead them through a process of self-discovery. And also, of course, can never miss the fact that only the Holy Spirit can actually guide them through that, right? He has to reveal to them what is and what isn't right. Well, Courtney, thank you so much. I know we spent an hour here doing this, and I could spend another hour easily, but just for the interest of time, would you just really quickly just share how people can get a hold of you, how they can learn more about what you're doing, and if they're interested in learning about the Center for Financial Discipleship and how to connect with you, please let us know how they can do that. I know that you do more than just coaching. You also are speaking at churches, you're teaching in churches. And so you are able to come into a church and help them to kind of get started. That's something you and I talked about recently, the ability to just get their feet wet, to get in and begin to make progress. So if you share some of that, that way, if anyone's interested, they can connect with you and gain more insight from your years of experience and what your ministry can offer.
Absolutely. So people can learn more about what we do at our website. So that is financialdiscipleship.center. And just like you mentioned, Leo, we essentially partner with churches and act as an extension of their stewardship ministry team. And so a lot of folks come to us, a lot of church leaders come to us and they say, we're interested in leaning more into this subject of financial discipleship, but we're not sure the best way to navigate it, or we're not sure how to get started. And so I like to say we're the catalyst, we're the fire starter for getting people excited to lean into financial discipleship at your church. So we can do sermons, we do workshops, we can do staff training in this conversation of money and financial discipleship. And of course, we can provide one-on-one financial coaching as your congregation needs it. So I love having conversations with people, answering questions. We like to, be people's biggest cheerleaders anytime people are excited to lean into this conversation more. And so if you have a specific question, you can reach out to me directly at Courtney@financialdiscipleship.center.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for taking the time to be with us and sharing your insights. It's definitely helpful. I know many of our listeners will benefit from it. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Leo. Appreciate you.
And I want to thank you for joining us for Stewardship Leader. We hope that this was of value to you. And if it was, please share it with someone else, another stewardship or church leader that may benefit from this content. And if you want to know more about our ministry, ChristianStewardshipNetwork.com, we would love to come alongside you and help you understand what stewardship and generosity ministry looks like in a church setting. We are servant leaders that serve in churches. Our community is made up of stewardship and church leaders that are literally practicing these types of ministry expressions in the church, both teaching, but also counseling and doing everything that we can to help people connect their finances to their faith. We would love to come alongside and help you understand how to equip your people doing that. Please check out the show notes. We will have links there, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Stewardship Leader.